I had an amazing question asked during my latest live stream. What do we do with our BMNR shares whenever Tom Lee truly does get to 5% Ethereum supply? That's BMNR's goal right now. Continue to acquire and potentially dilute shares to get to the potential of 5% Ethereum supply, and then the future begins. So, what happens whenever BMNR gets there? Well, currently we're at 2.83 million tokens of Ethereum. This roughly translates to about 2.3% of the total Ethereum supply, which is sitting at 120 million or 120.7 million Ethereum. And this only started just back on July 9th. This was their first raise and where they actually started to acquire Ethereum. That's 89 days to acquire 2.3% of the entire supply of Ethereum. Just getting you guys caught up. The future is, however, they want to get to roughly 6 million total tokens of Ethereum. That would be 5% of the total supply as of today. There's a little bit of dilution in Ethereum. There's also the potential for burn and deflation. That's not in today's video. It would take an additional 101 days from October 6th, which is whenever we figured out their last Ethereum purchase, which would then get us to the 5% Ethereum supply. So that leads us to January 15th of 2026 is the expected goal, assuming that Ethereum stays at its current price. Obviously, if Ethereum continues to rise, it's going to take a lot longer to raise that amount of capital to then buy more Ethereum. But currently, we're on the timeline of January 15th, 2026. Now, it's important to also highlight that the averages between the Bitcoin and Ethereum ratio is currently pointing out that if Bitcoin is between anywhere from $100,000 to $1 million per coin, that Ethereum should be trading in these ranges of $5,000 all the way up to nearly $50,000, and what Tom Lee had said, $60,000 per coin. So the immediate opportunity is in staking, obviously. 5% of the Ethereum supply being used to validate the network and increase its security could bring roughly about 181,000 more Ethereum on an annual basis of a 3% staking yield. Assuming the price of Ethereum in US dollars anywhere between, $4,700 up to 60,000, which is Tom Lee's goal, you would essentially see an annual USD reward if they were to sell that Ethereum all the way up to potentially $10.8 billion per year. That's at his most bullish case, okay? But here's the thing. That's assuming that they want to stop at 5%. Right now, the mission statement of BMNR is 5%, but that's actually not all of Tom Lee's words. Let's listen to him directly to hear what he has to say about the true goal of BMNR.
I've actually spoken to some researchers about this. Like, what's too much concentration? 5% is where you get a power law benefit. Not that, it starts to break down. These same researchers have actually told us that it's pretty safe to go to 10% of Ethereum. And as you know, Ethereum, no one controls it. I mean, if some entity owned 10%, and of course that entity is a permanent capital vehicle and is going to be staking and doesn't want to get slashed, so they're going to make sure they're validating properly, I'd actually think it really secures the network, because now all of a sudden a DAT, by the way, is completely decentralized, right? It's owned by shareholders. Like, BitMine has 270,000 shareholders. That's actually who controls BitMine. It's not centralized. I mean, it is actually, I'd argue, a way to ensure perpetual decentralization, because now the shareholders own BitMine, they control how the stock does, and and if the stock's valuation gets weak, then the DAT loses its ability to, raise capital. So it's truly decentralized.
He is not only excited about a future where DATs will be able to hold up to 10% of Ethereum, while actually securing the network even further and increasing that decentralization, surprisingly. But that's what he is stating here. But also, that allows them to do so much with their capital. So that could potentially mean that his stretch goal is continuing to raise money and get up to roughly 12 million total Ethereum tokens, right? So that would be BMNR's holdings of Ethereum to get to 10%. Well, what does that look like? Of course, the immediate thing to think about is staking, where we can start to see the annual USD rewards, essentially collecting 362,000 ETH, would translate to anywhere between $1.7 billion of staking rewards, all the way up to $21.7 billion. And that would immediately go to the bottom line as essentially net income. But there's also other things to think about: buybacks, dividends, potentially new investments, potentially getting into a validator network. And what I mean by that is that buybacks and dividends, if they continue to collect that 3%, they could sell off the additional Ethereum to other buyers, which would be a 3% yield, and then eventually give back to shareholders by buying back more equity or doing distributions through a form of dividend. In the other words, though, we could look at potentially new investments. Who's to say that this digital asset treasury has to stick to one form of currency, right? Ethereum might be one investment, but they already have Bitcoin on their balance sheet. If I'm not mistaken, I think it's 192 Bitcoin that BMNR holds. It's nothing compared to the other Bitcoin digital asset treasuries. But if he also sees a very long-term future for Bitcoin or maybe other crypto plays, they could also start to do a treasury play on other networks without affecting the total supply of Ethereum itself. The next one would be deepening the relationship even further with Ethereum. That could be through buying other L2s like 8Co, where they're actually acquiring WorldCoin, and BMNR has made a pretty great investment into Orbs, which has essentially brought them roughly an 8x since their investment just in early September. Or through staking, not only can they go and stake, but they can also set up their own network, set up data centers that allow them to potentially yield a much higher reward, and also do things like staking pools, which actually bring on other people to join the BMNR network and allow them to collect an additional premium, right? See, the thing is that what benefits BMNR the most is two things. You need capital and you need popularity. Tom Lee luckily has both. So not only could he set up a validator network that would be one of the largest in the entire Ethereum network because they're collecting more and more Ethereum, but also if people have the opportunity to select a validator, a node to then stake on through staking pools, they can choose Binance or some other form of a staking pool. But maybe you would want to choose Bitmine because you know that Tom Lee is a part of it and he's going to treat your capital well, as well as he's done with Granny Shots or BMNR. He's a pretty trustworthy guy whenever it comes to managing capital. So maybe it could be another way that they actually find a really great way to become, hopefully, the most popular Ethereum validator on the network. These are just some of my thoughts, but essentially, whenever you're looking at BMNR going forward, especially as they approach this 5 or even 10% of Ethereum supply, we need to start looking at it as just a general capital manager or a hedge fund in a way, that you believe that BMNR will be able to handle that capital better than you would yourself. If you think that an Apollo Global or a Citadel or any of these companies are also doing this, maybe BMNR is doing this with a more aggressive crypto-like strategy. But you guys let me know what you think BMNR is going to do once they hit 5 to 10% of Ethereum supply in the comments down below. Until next time, guys, bye for now.